There's a debate over innovation, growth, investment, and customer protection. And I think one thing that is important to keep in mind as we sort of move into these next phases, market structure legislation is one of the most important things for customer protection, allowing centralized intermediaries to come in and register and move away from the patchwork of state frameworks that we have and move to a consistent national framework overseen by the SEC and CFTC. Kicking it off on the policy first for those that might not be closest to market structure. Chairman Steil, for the audience here, what does market structure mean for the industry? What are the main goals and what does it mean for the United States?
What we saw in the past 4 years in the previous administration was so much enforcement action driving forward policy in an unthoughtful and unproductive manner. And so we were taking old laws, 33, 34 Act on the securities side, other regulations, and trying to jam in a regulatory framework for digital assets that didn't work terribly well. Clarity says instead of that approach, instead of relying on regulators using old regulations and old laws, let's set forward novel legislation to make clear rules of the road between the SEC, the CFTC, what's legal, what's illegal, with the ultimate policy goal of being, I think, two things. One, protect consumers appropriately, but also making the United States the epicenter of innovation and development in the digital asset space. I think the framework that we put forward with the strong bipartisan support across the board shows that I think we landed the plane in that way. And I think when you see people and you see Angie, Kraken, and I, Democrat, Republican, sitting together, what you really recognize is that a lot of this really shouldn't be partisan in nature. That this is about putting the United States in a position to outcompete the rest of the globe. And to me, that's the real focus here.
Ranking Member Craig, maybe same question for you. And how do you respond to this notion that we've heard some say, look, change in administration, why do we need legislation? So what does market structure mean and why is it so important?
Well, look, I think one thing that I've worked hard to communicate is this shouldn't be a political issue. Depending on the source you look at, 45 to 60 million Americans are now trading digital assets. This sector is already here. And so one of the things that I say to my Democratic colleagues is we have a responsibility to put the rules of the road in place. I agree with Bryan. I don't want the U.S. to be left behind with a critical new sector. And at the same time, I recognize that, for me, on the Democratic side, what's incredibly important is that we are able to, in clarity, have risk management where people know what their risks are, education part of it, where consumers know that there's going to be segregation of assets on the CFTC side. And at the end of the day, I think that with this many Americans already participating in digital assets, it just makes good sense to begin working on this market structure. And look, we don't agree on everything. We'll talk about the politics of it here in a minute. But this has been an issue for longer than 4 years. No. I realize that we didn't make progress over the last 4 years, but this sector's growing. It's not going to stop growing. We need to put those rules of the road in place now so that the United States can be the hub for entrepreneurship and investment moving forward.
And maybe a note on the policy from Kraken's perspective, and I know a lot of members of the audience, there's a debate over innovation, growth, investment, and customer protection. And I think one thing that is important to keep in mind, as we sort of move into these next phases, market structure legislation is one of the most important things for customer protection, allowing centralized intermediaries to come in and register and move away from the patchwork of state frameworks that we have and move to a consistent national framework overseen by the SEC and CFTC. So maybe on to process, for those, again, not as familiar, and Ranking Member Craig, maybe we can start with you. Different committees, different priorities, different constituents, farmers and ranchers in the Ag Committee, and markets and banks and traders for the Financial Services Committee. How do you navigate those different priorities? Your committee has a host of different things to do. How are you able to sort of prioritize crypto legislation and moving good policy forward with all the other priorities on the committee's plate?
Well, look, as we've worked our way through this process, obviously the reconciliation, the budget bill took up a lot of time and attention for us on the committee. But it was really important to me to dedicate time to member education. And I think this is still one of those things that we should continue to focus on, that you all should continue to focus on is look, I've got a wide range of ideological views on the Ag Committee. Every Democrat is there either concerned about farm programs or nutrition policy in this country. That's predominantly what the interest is. But digital commodities, being able to have those definitions, being able to educate folks on even what the CFTC does. One of my deputy staff director was former general counsel at the CFTC, so we've got a strong base of knowledge. And I think we had, my committee, Clarity, 70% of the committee voted for the bill out of committee with my Republican colleagues. And I think that's a testament to the education that we did. The broader Democratic caucus, I think, still needs more information on just how fast the sector's growing, and at the end of the day, needs to focus on the consumers that are already participating in the market structure. But for us, I approached it as first education, understanding that there are probably more improvements from our perspective that could come back from the work in the Senate.
And Chairman Steil, same question, and maybe another add-on. How do you navigate that across the major substantive differences? Again, the financial services product mostly focused on how the SEC is going to ultimately regulate primary financing transactions, right? So investors, venture capital firms, others that are interested in financing the innovators, right? The projects and the protocols. That's been a big part of the financial services focus, which is different than what the CFTC is really focused on. And so the Ag Committee's piece has been more on registration frameworks for centralized intermediaries and how the secondary market transactions are going to be overseen. So, how has the Financial Services Committee looked at that, and how are you able to sort of work across those two substantive areas?
It's a great question. I think some of this is asking one question, one above that, which is, why do we care about crypto in the first place from a policymaker perspective? And I think a lot of this is about winning the Web3 race. The United States positioned ourselves to win the Web2 race. And the benefits of that are in the labor markets, where kids can graduate from high school or from college and go get a good and a high-paying job, a family-sustaining job in the tech space. It's about capital markets coming to bear, and it's about making sure that the United States wins that race. So I can think about all my challenges that I have with big tech, but with an asterisk towards TikTok, almost none of them are domiciled outside the United States. And what we don't want to do is have the United States lose the Web3 race and allow these innovations and developments to occur offshore. And so then if you start with that initial premise to say, how do we position the United States to win this race? Now let's work backwards to the policies that need to be put in place in the weeds, CFTC, SEC, alphabet soup, Washington, D.C., in the weeds. Then we can get there. And I think what we did is we built good working relationships. Angie Craig, leadership on the Dem side, on Ag, G.T. Thompson, the Republican leader, French Hill in the House, myself, and others, who spent a period of time building this up, but asking the first question of, why are we doing this in the first place? It's protecting consumers and positioning the United States to win the Web3 race. Then from there, get into the technical aspects of delivering that legislation. And I think because we set with that framework, we're actually very successful in building the broad support that we needed to get both stablecoin legislation across the line and signed into law, and clarity through the House and in a position to move through the Senate.
I think maybe to hit on one of those points on, just sort of the international perspective, I had the honor to testify in front of the committee earlier this year. And a big part of Kraken's business, we're a U.S. born and bred company. We've been around for 13 years. And, we've been excited to see the progress here, because I think we want to invest and grow. But we're a global company, as many of our peers are. And we've been involved in the policy development process across the world, in Europe and other major markets. And so I think it's important to understand if the U.S. is going to remain competitive here, getting the legislation right, making sure it's not overly complex for the financing piece of this, making sure the legal bills for small startups and innovators don't double or triple because we're sort of working through more regulatory red tape. I think it's really important to look at what other countries do. It's not to say the U.S. needs to follow, and the U.S. needs to lead, but keeping it simple will win. Maybe on to the politics here, because I think this is one where we can get it right on the substance, but there can be political obstacles. Maybe Chairman Steil, what do you see as some of the political blockers right now? There's been a lot of work done, but as we know in Washington, politics can hold things up. So how do you see things moving forward?
So getting the Senate to act on clarity is job number one. And so applying pressure, you saw Senator Lummis, Senator Scott, both spoke about their optimism that we're going to move forward clarity and maybe with amendments on it before the end of the year. I'm optimistic on that. There's a lot of people in this room who can help educate our colleagues in the Senate to be able to get there and be in a position. I think there's still two fallacies that exist in the broader crypto space. The fallacy on the left is if you regulate or if you create a nanny state, you can prevent this from occurring in the first place. That's false. This is already occurring, and so we're in a position we should legislate. The fallacy on the right amongst my colleagues, which I think we've more or less starting to overcome in full, is that we shouldn't legislate at all and a laissez-faire system works. The reason that's a fallacy is there are rules of the road, there are regulations that are just poorly structured for the digital asset space. And so continuing this educational standpoint and then applying pressure into the Senate to get clarity across the line, I think is job number one.
Ranking Member Craig, maybe same question on, we've seen some progress, a couple steps forward, maybe a couple steps aside, maybe a couple steps back. What have been some of the biggest political hurdles from your standpoint?
Well, look, it's no secret that my side of the aisle would prefer not to see any president, I won't name one, any president participating in a market while a sitting president unless those assets are in a blind trust. So I think the conflicts of interest issue has prevented a number of Democrats from being willing to sign on to this legislation or support it. And at the end of the day, I take the view that, I said on the House floor during my debate time where I supported this legislation, led the debate for Democrats, worked to encourage my colleagues to vote for the legislation. I said, the elephant in the room here is the president's family's participation in this marketplace. And so I think that that's a stumbling block to get more Democrats to support the legislation. My alternative point of view is, yes, it shouldn't happen from any sitting president or their interest. However, here we are, and 45 million to 60 million Americans are already participating in this marketplace, and we have a responsibility to step up and create rules of the road for our constituents. So that's the political environment, candidly. If clarity in the Senate, if we could find some language that would allow or prevent those conflicts of interest to occur from our perspective, I think you would see a whole lot more Democrats support it. Whether that's politically possible, we couldn't find it in the House version. There is some language in there that is not strong enough for many members of the Democratic Party, and I certainly believe that that's a stumbling block to get more Democrats to vote for it.
And Chairman Steil, maybe touching on that topic, because I know there was an incredible amount of work done at the principal level to try to reach an agreement on this issue. The action's back in the Senate for now, but soon to return to the House. Hopefully soon. We heard earlier this morning, we've heard Chairman Scott from the Senate Banking Committee. We heard Senator Lummis say market structure bill is going to get done this year. How do we clear this hurdle on conflicts of interest or other issues that seem to be holding up bipartisan progress to the finish line?
Well, I think the House bill actually lays that forward. When you brought the House bill to the floor, you saw an overwhelming support for the legislation. I'd rather see a presidential administration that leans in and is pro-crypto than the previous administration. We could go back and forth on our views of the president. I'm obviously supportive of President Trump. I'm assuming Angie Craig is not supportive of President Trump. That's fine. I'm a Packers fan. She's a Vikings fan. We can still sit on the same stage. But broadly speaking, I think if this legislation comes before the Senate, I think it would move forward. I think the key in the currency of the Senate is finding that floor time to be able to move it forward. And so I'm optimistic that as they bring this forward, the support will be there, because I think the underlying necessity to make sure that the United States is leading in this regard, that we're protecting consumers appropriately, is so absolutely essential when the rubber hits the road, that the support is there in the Senate.
And maybe for this, not close to the steps and the intricacies of how this gets done, what's the path forward look like procedurally from here? What needs to happen? There's going to be a lot of Senate action coming up in September, October. What are the steps to the president's desk for this bill, just from a process standpoint?
Well, at the end of the day, Republicans have control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. So it will remain up to them whether this is a priority. I think there's a budget battle looming when we get back to Washington. September 30th, as we all know, is the deadline. So I think that's going to take up a lot of oxygen. But Republicans are in charge of what they put on the House floor and how fast they move this legislation. I know there are a number of Democrats in the Senate who look forward to providing input on how to make this legislation better. And I hope that we can get there. And of course, at that point, it would come back to the House for a vote again, and then would go to the president's desk.
And maybe we got about a minute left. I think some advice for the industry here, back to sort of where I started. We've seen that good crypto policy should not be a partisan issue. Again, in all the work that Kraken and our peers have done around the world, we haven't seen crypto become a political football. What's your advice and message to our community, to our industry, and how we can help reach that goal? We're going to see election cycles, we're going to see swings, but we don't want that volatility to come into the policy landscape to impact our ability to innovate and grow. So what's your advice and message to the industry on how to reach that goal?
Continue to advocate for good but strong consumer protections in clarity and in the legislative process. If we get that, I think we'll be able to move on a bipartisan basis. And the last thing you want, as any industry in America, is with a change of administration, a pendulum to swing back and forth wildly. So let's get the legislation as right as we possibly can, working together the first time around, and give the industry some clarity, no pun intended, so that you know what the rules of the road moving forward are.
Chairman Steil, same question for you for the close.
I'll leave it tight. It's engagement. There's a lot of folks that do not firmly understand this industry, the importance of it, or why it's relevant in a Web3 era. In helping people better understand that's essential, and just go back and look at how these debates played out at the beginning of the Web2 race. The Postal Service was going to create email addresses for every American because people didn't understand what email is. This is like describing someone what a QR code is before they owned a cell phone and before they even thought of putting a camera in your cell phone. You, this room, is the people that are developing the QR code before cameras were in cell phones, coming and engaging and helping people better understand why this industry is important, why it's relevant, is so absolutely essential so that more members of Congress engage in the space. I think that's what will bring us together to get this legislation, to get clarity, and additional future legislation potentially across the line.
Thank you for that. I think just to close, thank you, both of you. To you, we would not be here without your leadership and the hard work of your staff. Tireless hours. It's been many years, and we're really looking forward to seeing the finish line here on market structure. So thank you and, on behalf of the industry, and we'll close it out there.
Thank you.